5
It's January 5, Ukrainian Media Center Ukrinform starts its operation. My name is Tetyana Katrychenko. Today we start a day with a conversation about the investigation of the terrorist attack in Olenivka. Our briefing is called Crime Without Punishment. Right 1 year ago, the General Secretary of United Nations decided to disband their nation intending to investigate the terroristic act in Olenivka that happened on the 5th of January 2020. 29th July 2022. Neither United Nations nor RCRC were admitted to the place of terrorist attack. So now we will discuss what is done to return those injured ones and to investigate the conditions of the terrorist attack. Joining us in this studio are Maria Alekseevich, a wife of a soldier heavily wounded in a terrorist attack in Olenivka Families community NGO, Anna Lobova, a wife of a soldier heavily wounded in a terrorist attack in Alexander Markiv, a representative of the Coordination Headquarters for the Treatment of Prisoners of War, Tetyana Katrychenko, Media Initiative for Human Rights NGO, Andriy Yakovlev, Regional Center for Human Rights NGO, and Natalia, a representative of Ukrainian Helsinki Human Rights Union. So, Mr. Alexander, the United Nations mission is disbanded. ICRC is not in Olenivka either, but we all understand that investigation should be going on and the injured ones should be brought back. So what does the government do? Whom does it cooperate with to do it? And do we have any information about the number of people whom we were able to bring back from Olenivka? Well, let's start with the first question. What does the government do? Currently, documenting of this crime is quite an onerous task, and those investigations, those cases investigated by Security Service of Ukraine and the Office of Prosecutors General are not public due to reasons everybody understands. And in fact, if the next time we will be talking about what the government does, it's desirable to ask for comments from those bodies who exercise the investigation on the government level. No matter what we call it, a war crime or a terrorist attack, it's a serious violation of the Geneva Convention on Treatment of the Prisoners of War in a lot of aspects. I think my colleagues may give you more details about that. About what was done is that civil organizations, the Olenivka Families Community, Media Initiative for Human Rights, and Ukrainian Helsinki Human Rights Union were all signatories of the application submitted last year. In the month of September, we submitted an application containing quite a high quality proofs of and evidences of the facts of the terrorist attack. However, efficient justice should be bringing to liability those persons who were directly given orders about using the weapons of destruction, or bringing to liability those commanders or the government officials of the aggressor country who were supposed to ensure the compliance with the international humanitarian law. In this context, or based on what we can say publicly, is me or I personally, I hope that the efficient tool to be used could be a case viewed by International Criminal Court. I think that our task as a civil society, as a state, is to ensure the justice. Talking about the return of our defenders and civilians who were severely wounded and are illegally imprisoned by the aggressor, I think that you all know that Ukraine did everything that we could within the international law and currently the coordination headquarters is in permanent dialogue with International Committee of Red Cross regarding enforcement of Russian party to create and agree on the neutral members of the Ukrainian members of the medical team. Unfortunately, the enemy is so cynical that they even refuse to take back their heavily wounded. And talking about the way Russia treats the imprisoned Ukrainians and the way Ukrainian party adheres to the requirements of international humanitarian law. Just those banal facts may evidence that within the year 2023 there were 75 visits of international observers, including monitoring United Nations mission and ICRC. They almost on a weekly basis were attending the places of confinement of Russian prisoners of war in Ukraine, talking about the number of visits in the territory of Russian Federation or temporarily occupied territory of Ukraine. Well, let's say the number of such visits is quite small, and this is what we insist all the time in our communication with the Red Cross. Unfortunately, we see that international humanitarian law today does not comply with the challenges that the Russian Federation aggression poses in front of this institution. Well, thank you very much. So, talking about the number of people that we were able to bring back, I mean, from the number of those who were prisoners of war in Olenivka, well, I cannot give you the exact figure now. I know for sure that there is a significant number of men and women who were there, and moreover, they are the witnesses of this horrible, cynical, intentional murder. Generally, unfortunately, we cannot influence the specific personalities, specific names, as we try to bring back our defenders back home, because a lot here depends on the Russian side. Well, Ms. Anna, Mr. Alexander mentioned that it's the Ukrainian party who takes the most active part in the investigation. Such international organizations as United Nations, ICRC, they say that they cannot get access to those territories. However, the news about disbanding of the mission of the United Nations, it was shocking to everyone. What was the reaction of the loved ones of those who were in Olenivka, of those who perished? What was their response to those news? Well, first of all, I would like to say good morning to everybody, and let me tell you about our life during this period between the 5th of January 2023 and 5th of January 2024. Well, the first ones to say they're ready to provide the equipment and to help the injured ones were the ICRC, and they also promised to help in the DNA identification of the perished ones. A little bit later, United Nations stated that Antonio Guterres established a mission intended to investigate the conditions of crime in Olenivka, and I don't know the exact procedure. What were they supposed to do? Should they go there and to investigate the facts, or also to help those who survived that terrible night? However, on the 5th of January, we all understood that these two international organizations have taken the most precious from us time, and they gave us the vain hopes. And since then, after advice with Maria, because we knew each other before that, we've decided that it's necessary to establish our own community of the families of the injured defenders, because there were no talks about them during that time. We knew that on the 11th of October 2022 some bodies had arrived, bodies of the dead ones. Their identification was underway back then, and we decided to band together and to come to our government authorities with the questions that we had. We had the first meeting on the 26th of January 2023 in online format with the representatives of the Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights and representatives of the National Guard of Ukraine. There was something else I don't remember, and the summary was that the things are real bad. So then we got joined by the families of the dead defenders because they didn't even know whether their bodies were in Ukraine, whether the identification was still underway. We didn't know the lists all that time. Those who were not able to see their loved ones on the videos, on the videos from the hospitals or from the interrogations, we didn't really know the situation. There were only the list published by Russian Federation. They were not precise, the numbers were not mentioned. We were understanding that some number of people remains unknown to us. And during that time there was a lot of meetings. You know, when you come there ready for a constructive dialogue, you want to tell you about your vision, about what's going on with those people, because it's horror. You know what happened to the prisoners of war in the 21st century, specifically those ones who were surrendering against certain guarantees. And now we cannot go there because we may end up prisoners just like our husbands did. So there was an unpleasant situation when those government authorities representatives, they start telling us about the prisoners of war, you know, who are held prisoners since 2004. You know that there are people who are feel it even worse. You know, that's measuring of whose sorrow is worse. It's horrible. So now we have to work all together because otherwise this terroristic act will be documented in history with only one sentence, unfortunately. So the coordination headquarters provided me with the contacts of the Security Service of Ukraine investigator, who told me that yes, I'm dealing with this case, however I'm only dealing with the dead ones, and I'm going back to the coordination headquarters and I'm telling them, well, alright, so this person is only dealing with the dead ones, and this elect tells me then there is nobody who deals with the injured ones. So I've decided that we have to make an investigation going on in only within the framework of one case. There should be no chaos about it. There should be no multiple cases scattered all across Ukraine. Even the families of the injured ones did not understand me. They were asking me, why do you need it? Because it's not going to bring our guys back from imprisonment. And now within this year we've made it, and let me explain why. And when someone else from government may say that our family members feel better than someone else, we're going to show them a certificate that we are recognized affected in accordance with the Article 438 Part 2, and it will be a little bit different for our family members. It's an attempt of a murder, and for those who were killed it will be an intended murder. So for the time being, those affected by the terroristic attack in Olenivka are now different. How they are different from others ones, because they were attempted to be killed intentionally. After that, looking for opportunities to investigate this crime and to cover it in our country, we started asking the representatives of civil organizations, some of which are present here. Ukrainian Helsinki Human Rights Union provided an advice to our community members. We've also asked the Media Initiative for Human Rights, because back then they had first materials about the terrorist attack in Olenivka. However, they also had materials about the witnesses of the medics, and we've asked them for the second part, to make a second part based upon the witnesses of those liberated from that barrack. So we got it coordinated, and on the 26th of so on the 26th of July we had a presentation here, because this investigation gave a momentum to this case, and in August we were gathered by the coordination headquarters and with a huge number of organizations. There were representatives of MFA there, and we were looking for alternatives to this United Nations mission. How can we reach the international level? So we've handed over the application. I think the colleagues may tell more about that. So the application was accepted, and there was a joint delegation established together with our representatives, the Olenivka Families community, and the representatives of coordination headquarters. Mr. Alexander was in that mission, and representatives of those liberated. I hope that the work will continue. It's easier to work on investigation because we can do something. And talking about bringing them back as wives, as mothers, we are forceless here because it's not us who can deal with this. We can only provide the information, and then the coordination headquarters works with this. We've submitted a number of reports to the presidential administration, individually from every family and from our organization. It was not necessarily about those injured in Olenivka. We understand that in all organizations the letters pass through their office, and they have the standard response, and we're living in the age of digital technologies, and I think that to have your report paid attention to, you have to record a video or go to mass media. So to wrap up my address, I would like to ask the President of Ukraine now. I, Anna Lobova, am asking you, Volodymyr Alexandrovich, I'm kindly asking you to do everything reasonably possible to bring back from imprisonment all the heavily injured and wounded during the terrorist attack in Olenivka, and their brothers in arms who walked out of Azovstal against and surrendered against guarantees. This number is about 1,000 now. So those people walked out from the facility against guarantees, against promises. So please take all efforts to have them brought back to Ukraine. And in May 2022, Volodymyr Alexandrovich said that we need our people alive. In the night of 28-29th July, it demonstrated that more than 50 will never come back alive. And we were asking for statistic data about Olenivka. I can say that based on the details disclosed by Russian Federation, there was only one exchange on the 21st September 2022 when 11 heavily injured were returned. Today it's year 2024. During all this period, no single heavily injured person was brought back from imprisonment. There were some people not included in the list, probably because Russia didn't bring them to families. Some of them were liberated too, so the total number of those brought back from imprisonment was about 21 person. Thank you very much, Miss Anna. Miss Maria, your civil organization does a lot in terms of searching for information about the whereabouts of the injured ones to bring them back home. So what is your procedure for communication with the government authorities? Well, good morning everybody. I would like to say that talking about the investigation of Olenivka terrorist attack, you know, the Ukrainian government is in touch with us. We cooperate, we try to find ways to investigate these Russian war crimes. And in case of those heavily injured in Olenivka, many government representatives don't even know that they were there in Olenivka barracks. And we started talking publicly that there are people who survived that night, who need medical attention, who need medical aid, who still are being kept prisoners for more than 20 months. We were trying to get in touch with the presidential office. We were trying to do everything possible to be heard, so that the international community pays attention to us to help us to bring those people back. I asked the coordination headquarters, I asked the representative who deals with the international affairs, and I asked them whether we as a community of families of those who were killed or injured during the terrorist attack in Olenivka, whether we can go abroad to visit our influential partners to different countries that previously were taking part in prisoners exchange, who were acting as mediators, who were acting during all the negotiations. And we were offered such countries as Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and United Arab Emirates. We were talking about other countries too. We were thinking about how to do so that the majority of countries hears us, but we stopped on those three options, and the representative of coordination headquarters agreed that yes, it should be done. We should talk about our prisoners of war abroad. We should keep asking for help. But in November, he told me that it doesn't make a sense going there to any of those countries because all of them are busy with the war in Israel, and that they have less interest to Ukraine and Ukrainian prisoners of war. For back then I was shocked, but I was even more shocked with that exchange that has taken place yesterday. It's great that such a number of people was brought back within one exchange, but coordination headquarters and Mr. Kirill Budanov thanked United Arab Emirates for participation in this exchange. However, we were refused before that. So I asked this representative of coordination headquarters why we were refused as the family members of those who were executed during that night. And he said that Budanov in his interview didn't say who was specifically asked for help and mediation. I'm not satisfied with that answer, and it's surprising that the representatives of the government tell us one thing and they do another thing, and the families of the injured defenders cannot state it for all of the world that there was a terrible execution and there are still more than 120 people, including 51 heavily injured, still imprisoned. We had another unpleasant situation with other government representatives. When we, as a family members of the injured ones or the perished ones, we asked for a meeting to understand what is the stage of investigation of Olenivka terrorist attack on the government level, on the national level, and what is the story basically with bringing back even those slightly injured or non-injured. And when we come to the office of the Commissioner for Human Rights, you know, they meet us as the family members of perished ones. I don't understand why so, because there are specific lists for such meetings. There are lists of those present on those meetings, and the majority on those lists are the family members of the injured ones, and I don't understand why the government representatives don't even know that there are injured ones, that they keep surviving, that we're fighting for them here. And we would like the government representatives to start listening to us eventually. And on top of that, as we come to the meetings, as Anna said, we are sad that our family members are not special. I mean, those injured ones during Olenivka terrorist attack. So I want to make a statement for the representatives of the coordination headquarters and the Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights. Yes, our family members are special. Russians made them special when they made this cynical war crime, when they brought them to a specific hangar, to a separate hangar in Olenivka, in the industrial part of Olenivka that was remote from other barracks where other prisoners were stationed, when the medics were not admitted who were also imprisoned in America when they started transporting the heavily injured to the hospitals only in the morning, when during this evacuation to the hospitals their bodies were put on top of one another, due to which the heavily injured defenders were additionally injured. So this is what, and some of them died due to that. So yes, I think our loved ones are special, and in coordination with the representatives of the government, I was talking to Mr. Andriy Yakovlev, representative of coordination headquarters, to organize a meeting with the Olenivka Families community. With him and Mr. Dmitro Usov, we were talking to different representatives of the Office of Commissioner for Human Rights, of the coordination headquarters. We were trying to establish contact with those two people, and summer this year in August, our representative who was present during an event in Kiev, she reported to the representatives of Suspilne. She reported that Mr. Andriy Usov and Dmitro Usov didn't meet us so far. She asked Mr. Andriy Yusov, and he responded that he meets everyone. If someone failed to meet him, he offered to hand over his phone number. I was texting him, I was trying to call him, but there was no response from him. We had a meeting with Dmitro Usov, not Andriy Yusov, later on. But again, the summary was that it's Russia who's guilty, but we understand it anyway. We shouldn't be repeating it. We just want the government to work efficiently, to meet the families of the prisoners of war, so we can stand together in this fight, because this is something that is not existing now. And talking about those comments that it's only Russia who influences the negotiations, there are a lot of processes that the representatives of the government influence on. For example, the day of commemoration of the defenders killed during terrorist attack in Olenivka. Last year, I created a petition to the President of Ukraine to establish this commemoration date, so we remember Olenivka every day, because it's a mass murder of prisoners of war and it should not be forgotten. The petition accumulated the necessary number of votes, but we still have no response from the office of the president. On top of that, when the petition was being signed, we asked the parliament deputy. We submitted official applications to all of the deputies, and one of them registered a draft law to establish such commemoration dates. And the deputies just don't want to have the name of the commemoration day to contain the name Olenivka, so they wanted to make it a general commemoration day for all of the defenders killed and executed during imprisonment, both military and civil. But even in response to this draft law, our government didn't want to react properly. We just got it refused, not us, but the deputy. And Mr. Mikita Poturaev was the one who declined this law, and it will not be considered. It's something that depends on our country. It's something that depends not on Russia. So after more than 1 year and a half upon the terrorist attack in Olenivka, we still cannot commemorate the lives of those defenders who were surrendering against guarantees. And I want to add that our family members were defending the city of Mariupol, being encircled. Today they're more than 20 months being imprisoned. It will be 2 years soon of their imprisonment, but we don't know whether all of them can make it out of imprisonment. There's a lot of injured ones. They should be liberated. We're ready for an open dialogue with the government of Ukraine, so we can go abroad, so we can disseminate the information about the injured warriors, about the way the Russian Federation cynically kills our prisoners of war, about how they impede the access to the places of confinement. So I would like to ask the journalists, please help us to maintain this topic in the information space, to keep it always afloat, the topic of the terrorist attack in Olenivka, because we've seen multiple examples of the facts when people are being talked about. There's way more chances to bring them back from imprisonment. Thank you very much. Thank you, Miss Maria. A number of civil organizations started helping the families of those injured ones, of those who perished in Olenivka. The representatives of such organizations are joining us here today. Miss Natalia, a representative of the Ukrainian Helsinki Human Rights Group, please tell us more about the help that your organization extends to the families. Thank you very much. Good morning. Our organization started helping the families since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Talking about the family members of Olenivka, with the beginning of summer 2023, we're working with those issues, specifically with the families of the injured ones, injured defenders, represented by Anna and Maria here. For the time being, we entered into agreements with those families, and we are trying to provide them with all possible legal aid. One of the problems is that the United Nations Committee for Human Rights, whom we submit the applications to regarding the violation of rights of prisoners of war. You know, this committee is an organization which is working based on they supervise the compliance by the countries of the Pact on Civil Rights, and there are such articles as violation of prohibition of executions, and the Committee for Human Rights is loath to register such applications, and I would like to draw everyone's attention to this problem. To make sure that we can submit applications, we make an exhaustive request in the aggressor country. We were collecting the explanations from every single family member about every single detail of the terrorist attack, and we were submitting the applications, for example, to different organizations, to the Investigations Committee of Russian Federation, FSB, Ministry of Interior, to the Institute of the Commissioner for Human Rights. We were asking about every single person, every single injured defender, from the United Nations, from the ICRC, to any organization which in our opinion can help to identify the condition of those prisoners of war, or even to identify the fact whether they are alive or not. But it's still a problem. We try to solve it, but for the time being, our applications to the Committee for Human Rights are not an efficient mean. We were also asking the United Nations working group on forceful abductions, and it will be probably more efficient, but for the time being we have no information so far. This is why I would like to say that the work is still underway. We will continue trying to scale this wall, but the problem is that Ukraine is the first country where the pre-court investigation of the conflict is going on during the conflict. This is why there are no specific procedures which should be worked out. For the time being, that's it that I would want to say. Thank you very much, Ms. Natalia. Media Initiative for Human Rights, yet another organization who joined, and it's very important to give publicity to those problems, to give the widest publicity possible. So, Ms. Tetyana, can you please tell us about the area you work in? Good morning, everybody. I'm the Executive Director of the Media Initiative for Human Rights. I'm no lawyer, I'm a journalist. We really are in touch with the Olenivka family members starting from May. Our organization was covering the topic of prisoners of war and civil hostages, but it always seemed to us that Azov is such a self-sufficient, self-sustainable institution that they can do a lot of things on their own because they have a huge support by the society, by the government, by the family members. But in May we've realized that a terrorist attack in Olenivka has a lot of unknown things there, and we were trying to find out what were those unknown things, and it turned out that the chronology of events was not established. Many details were unknown about the selection of those defenders, about their transfer to that barracks, and how that that barracks looked like, when was the explosion, and where exactly the survivors and the heavily injured got, even those who had light injuries, because we understand that everybody who was in that barrack got injured. So basically we've prepared the investigation that Anna mentioned today. We continue this investigation because it's very difficult, and in this sense I understand our law enforcement agencies that besides necessity to have an initiative, a desire to investigate, there is still a lot of obstacles on the way of this investigation. First of all, the place of crime, the place of mass murder of the prisoners of war, it's in temporarily occupied territory and nobody has access to it so far. And even if they may have, it's not gonna change a lot because a lot of circumstances have changed. All the evidences are destroyed. So what we have left? We have to continue thoroughly interrogating those who come back from imprisonment, from captivity, to recreate the picture of what happened there. It's important for us to gather the evidences from those who were involved in organization and execution of those explosions. We know that the Office of Prosecutor General served a number of notes of suspicion about the crime committed in Olenivka confinement area. Those suspicions were about torturing of the prisoners of war, because Olenivka exists starting from March 2022, and there was a huge number of service members and civilians there. We know about the cases of cruel tortures there, and they were all going on upon the consent of the management of this so-called facility. Currently, Sergei Yevstikov was served a note of suspicion, the head of this colony. We've identified his name during the first part of our investigation when we were investigating the involved parties during December 2022. Also, there's a number of other people involved, and we have their names we talk a lot about national and international level today, so it's easier for us to say that the international community should help us to give publicity to this crime, to make sure that the perpetrators are being found and brought to liability, but we cannot neglect our law enforcement, including the security service of Ukraine, who are supposed to continue this thorough investigation and to eventually do everything we can to make sure that they can say that we've taken all reasonable efforts, but we cannot find all the involved persons, all the perpetrators, and this is when we should be reaching out to the international level. And our organization, on besides the Olenivka case, we deal with the murders of prisoners of war, and Olenivka is a case of mass murder through which we can say that the Ukrainian service members, thousands of Ukrainian servicemen are being tortured in captivity, and even those who were confirmed by the International Committee of Red Cross. The Red Cross officially stated to Russian Federation and to Ukraine that those servicemen are in captivity. Their bodies were brought back to Ukraine then, and they turned out to be dead under circumstances frequently unknown to us, and through Olenivka crime we can talk about that too. It's important to continue also talking that Olenivka crime may become a premise, an important premise to start talking about bringing the heavily wounded back, because in the barracks we know about the cases that there were servicemen in the barracks who have severe amputations of the limbs, or they have the eye lost, for example, and according to Geneva Convention they should be brought back not within exchanges, they should be either brought back to Ukraine or brought to third country for rehabilitation and treatment. It's important, and we have to continue talking about that. In reality, this exchange that happened yesterday, some of the heavily wounded returned during this exchange, and those who were in the barracks, about them we were trying to contact the Red Cross, we were trying to establish contacts through European Parliament deputies to start talking more intensely about the return of the prisoners of war. So we understand that there were 193 servicemen in the barracks during the time of explosion. 23 of them were returned according to our calculations, including heavily wounded and those who were lightly wounded and were not in the hospital after the explosion. So we've interrogated 10 servicemen plus 3 medics who were witnessing the facts of failure to provide medical aid. We continue this work, and we are also finalizing it. We want to identify the names of all of the servicemen who were in that barracks back then, because it's yet another thing we don't know yet. Thank you very much, Ms. Tetyana. Mr. Andriy, as a representative of Regional Center for Human Rights, can you please tell us what is the area that where your organization provides legal aid? Good morning. Well, first of all, I need to say that 3 organizations, the Regional Center, Media Initiative for Human Rights, and Ukrainian Helsinki Human Rights Union, applied to the United Nations Commission for Human Rights in October. This application was made by the coordination headquarters. I was serving it to the head of the commission, personally, they've seen our presentation and they're supposed to hold investigation. However, for the time being, we have no feedback from them and we don't really know what is the stage of this investigation. I would like to mention such a thing here. When we talk about international national support, by national support I mean our investigation authorities, and our government is entitled to such investigation based on Geneva Convention, but this national investigation is limited because we cannot directly investigate the place of where the crime was committed. And another obstacle is the immunity of certain government officials, and when we try to appeal to international community, they probably think like, well, how can the investigation be held if the mission is disbanded? Russia does not admit anybody to the place, to the site. Moreover, they try to conceal any traces of crime. And Media Initiative for Human Rights, they say that the prisoners were forced to remove all the traces, to clear all the traces of terrorist attacks. So when you view this situation in such a way, it seems like you can do nothing, but it's wrong. In fact, we have to segregate the events in three parts. First, the attack or the act of murder, and it's difficult really to say there. We have our arguments here. We talk about the guilt of Russian Federation, but an investigator, an independent investigator may say, okay, let the investigation prove it, and that's true. We have to count in many facts, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we cannot prove it. And yet another part is what happened after the attack. And after the attack, there was a huge number of injured ones who were not provided medical aid, and there is the strict liability of Russian Federation because it was on the territory under their control. And we know upon interrogations that the first aid started coming by the Ukrainian prisoners of war who were admitted to the site 2 or 3 hours after the attack, and the transporting has taken place 5 hours after the attack, and the transportation was going on in the cruelest way possible, using the cargo trucks, not the ambulance cars. And we have a lot of evidences in public space from Olenivka that due to untimely delivery to the hospital, some people died. And in the same way, we can say about the act of murder here, it was an attempt of their lives, and due to failure to provide medical aid, there were more tragedies. And the third part is what happened post factum. And it's a general problem of all of the prisoners of war, because all of the prisoners of war, they are deprived of any means of communication with the outer world. It doesn't only allow them to contact the outer world, but also to control their, or to monitor their health condition. Then there are tortures. Even United Nations recognized it. Improper nutrition, because based on the latest exchange we can see that people are coming back from imprisonment with a serious weight loss. And Geneva Convention contemplates that nutrition should be such that it should prevent the weight loss. And the investigation of the second part, it brings us to liability of Russian Federation. We cannot say during investigation that we can find other guilty parties here. We see the clear liability of Russian Federation. So how can we do the investigation? No matter that many may say that there is a limitation of access by the government representatives, we see a lot of factors that allow us or will allow us to say that certain part of investigation can be performed. Many know that there was a trench dug near so-called Barracks 200, and we can prove the existence of that trench using the satellite images. So whether that trench was dug near that barracks or near other barracks too, when was it dug, and respectively we may continue the investigation having taken the information from the satellite images, and we see the attack site there, and this site of attack where we see the epicenter, we can make certain conclusion about the direction of the strike. We know that based on the latest report of the United Nations, they say that the projectile was coming from east to west, so it was coming from the territory under Russian control. Whether it is so, it's subject to investigation, but we can find it out using the satellite imagery or other sources. And talking about the investigation on the international level, we have to take into account that ICC is in fact the only court that is entitled to investigate the crimes against humanity or war crimes, and they can take up this case only when we prove that it's not only a war crime, but it's a crime that has taken place where we cannot investigate it either physically or due to the obstacles such as diplomatic immunity. So we have to prove it to ICC that there are Russian government officials involved so they can take up the investigation. So now everybody is doing this to investigate all the conditions to either investigate the participation of Russian government officials to expedite the submission of case to ICC. Thank you. Dear journalists, do we have any questions on the floor? Good afternoon. I'm a correspondent of Latvian State Radio in Ukraine. I have a question. In your opinion, what are the specific actions of international community to be taken to investigate the crime and to bring the perpetrators to liability? Thank you. Let me respond from the families. We expect the ICRC first of all to find the exact lists of those who were killed, those who were injured, and those who survived that terrible night. Ukraine doesn't have those lists so far. The International Committee of Red Cross, since spring 2023 until autumn 2023, our families were getting repeated confirmation that those people are still in prison, but there was nothing said about Olenivka specifically. Russia just confirmed that yes, those people are imprisoned by us, but nobody has ever seen them. But it's not like 100% guarantee. Not all of them were checked. There is still a question, and we will want to ask the ICRC to provide the precise lists. And if I may add, when we talk about Olenivka, it's an international war crime, and a war crime is a crime against the global order, not against the victims of that crime, but it's about the world order. It's the crime against world order, and if such crime is not investigated, it's of harm to world order, and it says that it can be repeated. So we don't only have to protect the victims, the family members of the victims of this crime, but it's a threat to the world order, and we can help it with investigation. And also, what other help can be done? The collection of evidences and reestablishment of the mission, or establishment of other missions that can investigate the area, because we see the mission was disbanded, Russia does not provide access, and everybody acts as if nothing can be done. But in fact, every single case starts with the tasks that should be performed. And when you say it cannot be done, you stop, and the global community may influence on enablement of such international mission who performs the investigation. And third aspect is the attention and publicity, because we see that publicity seriously influences all the parties of the conflict. It can even be demonstrated by the fact, like you remember previously, we were talking about the demonstrative proceedings over the Azov servicemen caged in Mariupol, but global publicity prevented this process. So yes, we need communication, and we need to take steps to have the investigation going, including the international investigation. Thank you. And let me add just in brief, when we, together with the family members of those who perished or who were heavily injured during the war crime, this terrorist attack, and as it was said many times today, a lot of time has passed since that night, 28-29 July 2022. And during or even after the address during the 53rd session of the United Nations Human Rights Council, we've seen the reaction of the audience. The representatives of aggressor country were not present there because they were not elected, and they ignored this mechanism since then on. But after they've seen, the audience has seen the video with their own eyes, the video that was made right after this murder, right after this event, the matter of liability is not of rhetoric nature. We all understand that it's going to be a long process. If we see other cases like the International Tribunal in Yugoslavia, the basic things is the right to life, the Geneva right that was so much cherished by the international humanitarian law, by all the organizations. Somehow the Russian side can neglect it, but Ukrainian side continues adhering to all those conventions. We were mentioning many cases when Russians use the prisoners of war as a life shield. The multiple cases of executions, the video evidences of execution of Ukrainian prisoners of war in captivity. And when we see no efficient mechanism to bring the perpetrators to liability, probably we have to create it. An important element that the government works on is documenting of crimes of aggression, documenting of losses as such. But talking about basic things, basic liability, the special reporter of United Nations on tortures, when she was visiting many government authorities, including coordination headquarters, she was saying that the efficient liability should be ensured. And when there will be a list, when we identify the names of every single perpetrator involved, and when their liability will be ensured, that will be a period in this history. I would like to thank our speakers. Let me remind you that we were talking about the investigation of crime in Olenivka. I believe that using the joint effort of the government and the civil organizations, both international and Ukrainian, and the families, we will come closer to bringing the perpetrators to liability, all of them. And Ukraine Media Center, Ukrinform, ceases its operations for today. We start putting together the schedule for Monday. Thank you for staying tuned. Glory to Ukraine.